This is Hooping Crochet Inspired Embroidery for Quilting. The first thing that we need to do is stabilize the actual fabric for the hooping process. And as you all know, fabric stretches. So when you are working with this, the length of the fabric, which is this right here, needs to go the length of the hoop, and that's really important. So the width of your fabric stretches more than the length. And that's really an important thing to understand. So the stress on your hoop is actually going to be more of a problem across the middle. So we want to make sure this is as stable as it actually can be. So we want to take our fabric, and I'm just going to use spray starch, and I'm going to spray it on the top. Now the thing to remember with spray starch is it will flake if you press it. So what you want to do next is just turn it over, and what that does is actually capture the starch in between the layers of the pressing mat and the actual fabric. So we want to press at this point. You want to use a good hot iron. We want to do this 3 times. The side that we pressed is up. We want to go ahead and starch that side. So now we've starched both sides. And turn it over and press it again. And you want to make sure that it's good and dry. What's important with the hooping is the same rules apply as in piecing. You want to keep your grains really stable. So the length grain always goes the length of the hoop, and that's really an important thing. We want to do it one more time, and it's actually 3 times we need to starch this. And some people like using the liquid starch, and that's fine if that works for you. If you are going to use the liquid starch, you can actually let the fabric dry and then press it, and it works really well. So go ahead, and if that's your preference, go ahead and use that. Okay, so we want to press and make sure that it is good and dry and the moisture is all out of the fabric before you put it in the hoop. So turn it over, and I can still feel a little bit of dampness over here. So the fabric now is stabilized to go in the hoop, and you can see how it's not stretching. It's still going to stretch just a little bit, but not much on the actual cross grain. This now is ready to go in the hoop. To prepare your hoop for this, we've created a class, and you can view that on our website. We're going to use Elmer's washable school glue. I use the purple, but some people have a real problem with the color. If you do, you can use the water-soluble clear. They do handle a little bit different, so try it with the purple to start with. If you're okay with that, you can try the clear and see which one you like. So we're going to put the glue on the hoop, and to start with, you want to put it on, and what you don't want to do is this. You want to put, and I always go 3 times, because you need a solid line of glue all the way around. And I know that sometimes people think this is kind of a silly extra step with the hooping process, but because we're working with 3 layers, we want to get the same tension or stability of this unit. So if you put 3 layers together, those layers are not going to be stable in the same way. So I put the glue on, and I always check to make sure I've got a good amount on. With the hoop, this glue will kind of get built up with many, many hoopings. So if it gets really built up, you need to just put a damp towel over it, let it sit overnight, and the next morning you can just wipe it off. So it's very easy to clean. Don't pick at it. Just use a little bit of moisture. We put our fabric on, and I like to just kind of place it, make sure my grains are aligned with the hoop. because we're making quilt blocks here. So we want to make sure that it's all aligned. And I start on the length. Now when I'm doing the actual, just the stabilizer, I go corner to corner, but with the grain lines, that's the first thing we need to make sure is aligned, is the grain line. So I want to go on the length, and then I pull it from the other side. And you don't want to pull it too tight because that causes a needle deflection problem. You want to actually just make it stable. And I'm using corsage pins, and inside I have a foam plug on the inside of the hoop that makes it stable for me. All right, so once we've got that, then we do the other side, and I always do the far side. And as you can see, I'm keeping the grain lines as stable as possible. Now, when you're hooping without the system that I use, you're going to get more tension in the corners, and that's going to stretch the bias, which makes your block distorted. So you want to make sure that you're very, very stable and the grain lines are aligned. Just as in sewing a regular block and you've cut it off grain, it will distort inside the quilt. So we want to make sure those same rules are being followed. At this point, we want to go ahead and press it down. Okay, we've pressed it, and then we want to repeat the gluing process to put the stabilizer on the back side. So we go ahead and put glue on. Now you don't need quite as much as the first application. The first application actually secures it to the hoop. This makes the stabilizer connect to the fabric. If you were doing this with a clear, you would want to make sure that you don't get too much in one spot, because that's where you'll have the problems if you use the clear. I have my stabilizer, and I've cut a piece the same size as the fabric, basically. I don't know if you noticed, but I didn't take the pins out. That allows me to just do it very quickly. So I leave the pins in, and you want to do it the same way. And then do the cross grain. Which I found very interesting is that the stabilizer also has a bit more stretch cross grain on it. So I also try to cut my stabilizer on the length. And that's not absolutely mandatory, but I find it really makes a difference for me. So now we have this ready to go, and I want to use my pressing cloth on top, because you can't put your iron straight on that stabilizer. So we just give it a nice quick press just to secure it to the fabric. And if we've done this, we've actually created a very stable environment for your stitching. We want to repeat it one more time with another layer. Remember to do the length first. So we're keeping consistent in how we do it so that your tension and the stability of this hooping is consistent. So we do the length and then we do the width. Now if you were hooping just normally, what happens when you hoop is that there's a weak spot right here in the hoop. The corners are pretty stable, length kind of stable. Where you would end up having problems is in the center of the block. Things kind of pull, and then you'll have misalignment. So you want to make sure not only do you keep a consistent tension so the machine can act consistent clear across the whole bed of the hooping. And as you can see, it doesn't really take that long. And one of the problems also that I found with hooping for quilting is you have to leave so much fabric on the outside just to get in the hoop. There is massive fabric waste if you are embroidering with fabric. So you want to make sure that you go ahead and press. And that the waste also happens with the stabilizer. And I find that to be, it's troublesome for me to have that kind of waste when you're involved in the creative process, especially with the embroidery, because you've got to do a lot of tests to make sure you have the color combination the way you want, or whatever that is. In the process, you're going to get these little, it's not really technically a hole because you've got a bunch of layers together, but it shows up as a hole. And what caused that is the glue went over the pin and had a little extra in that area. I don't want you to worry about it. It's not a problem, but if you do want to use the clear glue, that's where you're going to have the problem. And it won't really compromise the piece if you have a little bit of holes right on those edges because it's stabilized all the way around. And we've put 2 layers of it. So I don't want you to worry about it. So when you do have something like that and it's really big, you know to handle your glue just a little bit differently. Everything's been pressed. I want you to go ahead and pull the pins out. And what you need to remember also is that in the pin area, it's not necessarily dry. And what we're after is the glue being completely dry so it won't shift during the embroidery process. When you put the iron on it, it actually spreads the glue out so there's no air gaps in between the layers. And that's really important to do that. If you have air gaps, it's going to cause a weak spot. So you want to put your pressing cloth back over and press again. Now, when I put the pressing cloth back over, that's exactly what I did when I made the first mistake. Because, see how we've got that? Because the pressing cloth is glued to certain spots, it'll hold. And what you've done is eliminate the moisture. So now this is ready for the embroidery process. Let me turn it over so you can actually see how consistent the hooping is. There's no uneven spaces anywhere. It's not super, super tight. It is very naturally stable.